Hey there my quilty friends, in today's video I'm going to show you how to make these really super cute and easy fabric trays. Now you can use them to put your quilting tools in, your trinkets, whatever you like. You're going to be surprised at how easy they are to make. Let me show you how. To make your fabric tray you're going to need 2 pieces of fabric, and I'm using the same fabric. You could use a different fabric for the lining and the outer. And mine measures 7 inches by 7 inches squared, but you could make these any size you like. And then I've got a piece of Palin fusible fleece, and I've cut this 1/2 inch smaller than my fabric. So my fleece measures 6.5 inches by 6.5 inches squared. You could also use an interfacing like Palin SF101 if you wanted to. I've got one of my pieces of fabric here with the wrong side facing me and the right side facing down. Then I'm going to take my Palin fusible fleece, and the side that's all bumpy, that means it's got the glue on it, I'm facing that down onto my fabric in the center, so I've got about an even space around the whole edge here. And then I'm going to press, and then what that does is glue it onto my fabric. Now we're using a fusible fleece or an interfacing just to give our little fabric tray more body and shape, and just helps it keep its shape better. And then I'm just going to flip that over and iron it on this side. Now I've got one piece of fabric with the right side facing me, and I'm going to take my second piece with the right side facing down, so it's right sides facing each other. If you're using directional fabric, just make sure you're happy with the way it's facing. And then what we're going to do is line up all 4 edges. So I've lined up all 4 edges here, and then when I'm happy I'm going to pin. And I like to start off by pinning in the corners. And then I'll just pop one more in the center there just to hold it all in place nicely. Okay, now what we're going to do is sew around the entire edge, but we do need to leave an opening so we can turn it right sides out. So you can just sew now if you can remember that, but if you won't, you could take a washable marker and just mark where you're going to start sewing, come around, and then stop again. So that just tells me where to stop and start, and that's about 3 inches. So starting where I made my mark, now I'm going to sew with the 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'm stitching at stitch length 2.5. I am going to do a back stitch because when we turn things right sides out it tends to pull at those stitches, so I do like to do a back stitch. So I'll go a few stitches forward and then back, and now I'll go forward. I'll remove any pins if they get in the way. When I come to the corner, I'm just going to do my best guess at stopping at about 1/4 inch away from the edge, lift my foot up and turn, and then carry on around all 4 sides until I get back to the other mark that I made. So coming up to my second mark, doing a back stitch, and then cutting my thread. Now we're going to cut the excess off all 4 corners, so we want to cut that excess off as close as we can to the stitches, but not too close because we don't want to ruin the integrity of the corner. So close but not too close, and on all 4 corners. Then what we're going to do is find our opening. I'm going to pop my fingers in between the 2 layers and grab a corner and push it through and grab it and pull it through. Okay, and then at this point I like to use a point turner. So I'm just going to use a point turner to get all my corners to sit as best as I can. You could use something similar. Just make sure it's not too sharp, and also be careful with your point turner because you can accidentally poke a hole through your fabric. So just wanting all my corners to sit really nicely. It's a bit fiddly. And then let's give that a press. So now we're going to press it, and we want to find our opening and get that sitting as nice as we can. So I'm just going to fold that in so that it looks like it's not even there. Oh, it's being a bit fiddly. Okay, and when I'm happy, I'll just press. And then I'll just come to all the sides and make sure they're rolled out so it's sitting really nicely, and press. And then I'll give the whole piece a press on the front and the back. Okay, my opening is looking a little bit wobbly there. You can see here that it's sitting a bit forward at the back there. So I'm just going to roll that in a bit more and press it again. Okay, that looks better. So now I'm just going to take a pin and pin my opening shut. And then we're just going to sew around the entire edge. So now I'm going to sew right before that pin there, and I'm going to sew with a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. It needs to be smaller than our 1/4 inch seam allowance so that we will be sewing our opening shut, and I'm stitching at stitch length 3. So just work out the best guide for you on your sewing machine. And I'm not going to worry about a back stitch. And again, I'm just doing my best guess at the corners, lifting my foot up with making sure my needle's down and then carrying on around. And now I'm coming back up to where I started. I just want to go over the top of my stitches. I'm holding this piece over to the side because I don't want to run over it and make a little bird's nest. And I'm going right over the top of where I started and then doing a back stitch. And then cutting my thread. Okay, let's move on to the next step. So now what we want to do is sew around our piece with a 1-inch seam allowance, which is decorative, but it also helps our little fabric tray sit nicer. And you should have a 1-inch marking on your sewing machine, but I do find because it's such a big distance, it is hard to guess when you're about 1 inch to do your turn. So what I'm going to do is take a ruler and find my 1-inch mark on my ruler and pop it on all 4 corners. So I've got the edge of my piece here on 1 and my edge on this side on 1. And then all I'm going to do is take a washable fabric marker and just mark right there on the edge, so I'm 1 inch across and 1 inch in deep. And you can use any marker you've got. Maybe you want to use a chalk pencil or anything that won't stay there forever. So then I'm going to do exactly the same on all 4 corners. And all that's going to do is tell us where to turn when we're sewing around doing our 1-inch seam allowance. One thing I did forget to mention is do those dots on the side that you'd like to be the inside of your tray. Now what I'm going to do is find the 1-inch mark on my foot plate, and that's right here. I'm going to put my fabric right up along that 1-inch mark, and I'll start about 1 or 2 inches away from my first corner. And I'm still stitching at stitch length 3. I'm not going to worry about a back stitch, and I'm just going to stitch down to that first dot that I did. Lift my foot up, make sure my needle's down and turn, and then I'm going to carry on along until I get to my next dot that I drew, and then turn and carry on until I've gone all the way around. So coming up to where I started, stitching over the top and then doing a back stitch, cutting my thread, and then we can cut any loose threads at this time. Oh. Okay, let's do the last step. Now what we need to do is pinch all 4 corners and mark where we're going to sew, and I do like to just clip it in place. So I'll grab one corner here, and I've got the side that I'd like to be the inside of my tray facing me with the right side facing up, and I'm going to fold it in half. So I get a long piece here and a fold on this side. And now this is my first corner. What I want to do is I want to draw a line from my stitches straight up. So I'm going to take my ruler, place it on the edge there, not on the fold but on the edge. My fold's down here, and then I just want to draw a line from the stitches going up, and that's where I'll sew. Then I will just pop a clip in to hold it in place, and then you could sew one at a time, or I'm just going to come over to the other side and do exactly the same thing. I'm going to flip it over. So I'm just making sure those edges are all lined up nicely. I also want to make sure it's sitting nicely inside there. So I've got my edges there. I've got my stitches. I can see the points right there where I've turned. I'm going to place my ruler on that straight edge and rule my line. I'll clip it, and then I'll repeat that for all 4 sides. So now we're going to sew from the top of the line down to the bottom of the line, and we will do a back stitch at the beginning and the end. I'll just remove my clip so I can have easy access, starting right on that very edge. And I am stitching at stitch length 2.5 because 3 is a little bit too long to get a nice close stitch. Coming down to the edge and doing a back stitch, and then cutting my thread, and I'll repeat that for all 4 corners. Then what we'll do is we'll just trim any loose threads, getting as close as we can to the fabric and the stitches without accidentally cutting it. And then let's give it one last press. Now what we're going to do is just give it a press so that it just sits really nicely. And this is where I find doing that extra row of stitches just really helps it keep its shape a little bit better and sit nicer. So I'm just lining down those edges, and it folds nicely exactly where we've got the stitches. And isn't that cute? Our own little fabric tray. So there we have our fabric trays. Aren't they super easy to make? And if you've liked this video, please hit the like button. It really helps me out, and even better, hit the subscribe and the bell so you don't miss another video. Now don't forget, you can make these any size you'd like. Just have a play with what size you start out with your fabric. And if you'd like the sides to be deeper, well, we sewed ours with a 1-inch seam allowance, and that's where we folded them in. You could make that deeper by making it 1.5 inches, 2 inches, or whatever. You're not going to have that guide on your foot plates, so you might want to draw actually the whole line that you're going to sew to make that a little bit easier. And if you did want them sturdier, well, we put the fusible fleece on one side. You could do that on both sides just to make it that bit more sturdier. And if you've enjoyed this video, you might like to check out another video where I make fabric boxes, and I'll put the link above. Thanks so much, and I'll see you in the next video.